All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack the story of a man who literally redrew the map of a continent, a military mastermind who pulled off one of the most audacious campaigns in all of history. His name was José de San Martín, and his life? Well, it's one of the great puzzles of power.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. He's not the national hero of one country. He's the national hero of 3 different nations. That fact alone puts him in this tiny, incredibly elite club of historical figures. He was, without a doubt, the key leader in the southern part of South America's fight for independence from Spain.
And that is the central mystery of his life, isn't it? At the absolute pinnacle of his power and fame, with a continent practically at his feet, he just walked away. He resigned every command, went into a self-imposed exile, and died decades later in some small town in France. To figure out why, we got to go back to the beginning.
So, picture this. It's the early 1800s. South America is just a powder keg of revolution. People are fighting for their freedom, but the Spanish Empire, it still has a very powerful grip. The whole independence movement is on a knife's edge, dangerously close to being snuffed out.
And into this chaotic scene steps José de San Martín. Now, this is a man of 2 worlds. For more than 20 years, he was a loyal, decorated officer in the Spanish army. We're talking lieutenant colonel, a guy who fought against Napoleon's armies all over Spain. But then, in 1812, he does a complete 180. He quits, sails back to his birthplace in Argentina, and offers his sword to the very people fighting the empire he'd served his whole life.
Now, at this point, the revolutionaries had basically hit a brick wall. The whole military situation was a stalemate. The independence forces in Argentina couldn't move north because the royalists were dug in deep in Upper Peru, what's now Bolivia. Army after army had tried to break through and failed, crushed by the tough terrain and the Spanish defenses. Peru, the royalist headquarters, was basically a fortress. So the old way of doing things just wasn't cutting it. They needed something new, something radical. And that's when San Martín comes up with a plan so bold, so completely out there that a lot of people at the time probably thought he was insane. And this is where you really see his genius shine. He basically said, why are we trying to smash down the front door when we can sneak around the back? Here's the plan. Step 1. He'd build a brand new army from the ground up. Step 2, instead of going north, he'd go west, right over the Andes Mountains, something no one thought was possible. Step 3, he'd liberate Chile. And finally, step 4, he'd use Chile as a launchpad for a naval attack on Peru, hitting the Spanish right where it hurts. The core of this whole thing was his Army of the Andes. And look, this wasn't just a bunch of soldiers. It was a massive community effort. When he became governor of Cuyo province, he turned the entire region into a war factory. He drafted citizens, he freed slaves on the condition that they join the army, and he brought in Chilean patriots who'd fled their home. Everybody had a job to do, from women weaving uniforms to blacksmiths making weapons.
Okay, so you have the plan, you have the army, but now comes the hard part. The really hard part. Marching that entire army over one of the highest, most unforgiving mountain ranges on Earth.
I mean, just get a load of these numbers. This isn't a small commando team. We are talking 5,000 soldiers. But on top of that, 10,000 mules just to haul the cannons, the ammo, and all the food, plus another 1,500 horses for the cavalry. It was like a moving city, heading straight into an environment where just staying alive was a victory.
And the cost? Wow, the cost was just staggering. It took them almost a month. By the time they made it down into Chile, more than half of their animals were gone. Over 5,000 mules and 1,000 horses had died from the freezing cold, the thin air, the sheer exhaustion. That is an unbelievable price to pay before you've even fired a single shot.
You know, to give you some perspective, military historians put this right up there with Hannibal crossing the Alps to attack ancient Rome. It's one of those legendary military achievements. It's a testament not just to brilliant planning, but to pure, raw human determination. San Martín had done the impossible.
So, did the insane gamble work? Oh, you better believe it. It paid off, and it paid off big time. The Spanish forces over in Chile were totally blindsided. They never saw it coming. San Martín's army, even after that brutal crossing, was ready to fight. And the wins came one after another. Bang, bang, bang. Just a few weeks after the crossing, in February 1817, he wins a huge victory at the Battle of Chacabuco and marches into the capital, Santiago. A year later, the Battle of Maipú completely crushes the remaining royalists and secures Chile's independence for good. With step 3 done, he builds a navy,
sails north, and by July 1821, he's in Lima, declaring Peru independent and being named its protector.
And this right here, this tells you everything you need to know about the guy's character. After freeing Chile, the people there offered to make him their supreme leader. And he said no. He turned it down flat. He insisted that a Chilean should rule Chile, and he put forward his friend, Bernardo O'Higgins, for the job. You see, for San Martín, it was never about personal power. It was about liberation.
But the war wasn't completely over. There were still pockets of royalist forces up in the mountains of Peru. To finish the job, San Martín knew he had to join forces with the other great liberator of South America, Simón Bolívar, who was coming down from the north. And this sets the stage for one of history's most famous and most secret meetings. So, in July of 1822, in the city of Guayaquil, the two titans of South American independence, San Martín and Simón Bolívar, meet for the first and only time. And get this, they met completely alone, behind closed doors. No one else was in the room, no notes were taken. To this day, nobody knows exactly what they said to each other.
But we can make a pretty good guess about what they disagreed on. You see, they had totally different visions for what a free South America should look like. San Martín, ever the practical guy, thought they should set up constitutional monarchies, kind of like Britain. He figured it was the only way to keep things stable after so much war and to get respect from all the powerful monarchies back in Europe. Bolívar, on the other hand, was a passionate idealist. He was all in on creating republics.
And what happened right after that meeting was a bombshell. San Martín goes back to Peru, resigns as its protector, hands over command of his entire army to Bolívar, and just starts packing his bags to leave the continent forever. The man who had liberated 3 countries was just walking off the stage at the height of his power.
So why? Why on earth would he do that? Well, the general thinking is that he was smart enough to realize that two leaders with such different visions couldn't work together without it turning into a civil war. He knew their rivalry could destroy the very independence they had fought so hard for. So he made a choice. He sacrificed his own fame and power for the good of the continent.
His life after this is just such a quiet end to such an epic story. He moved to Europe with his daughter and lived a pretty simple life. At one point, he even wrote back to Argentina and offered to come home and fight in another war, but the government there didn't even bother to write him back. He died in 1850, an ocean away from the lands he set free.
But of course, a man like that doesn't really fade away. His legacy is everywhere. You can see it in these massive, incredible monuments like the Hill of Glory, which honors his Army of the Andes, and you can see it in the pockets of Argentinians today, right there on their money.
And this one final act, I think, really says it all. His most treasured possession was his curved saber, the symbol of his entire military career. And in his will, he didn't leave it to a son or a relative. He left it to the leader of Argentina, who he felt had done the most to defend the nation's honor. Even in exile, his heart was still with his homeland.
Which brings us right back to that big question we started with. San Martín's life is this incredible lesson in military strategy, for sure. But it's also a deep, profound story about leadership. His final, and maybe his greatest gamble, wasn't on a battlefield at all. It was a choice to step aside, to make sure the cause was bigger than any one person. And that's a choice that really makes you think about what true power is all about.